obviously, guys, we're going to talk about the transmission, right? The AMTG is what they're calling it. It's kind of the blanket term, AMTG, from the versions before, right? C, D, F, now G. G is the newest version. And as we progress, right, through the future, I'm sure that we're going to have H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. And you guys can all agree that from the C version to the D to the F, right, everything has progressively gotten better. Every change that we've made has made it better. With this transmission, it's going to be the same thing. Everything we're doing is getting better. Now, have any of you guys had the opportunity to drive one of the new trucks? You have? Yeah. So, would you agree with me when I say they are super smooth? Super smooth. Yes. When you get the opportunity to drive one of these trucks, the first thing that you're gonna notice is, man, this thing shifts really smooth. Not even as a sales pitch or whatever, but the cab, right, is super quiet. The first feeling you get is like, I'm driving a car, right? But it's as a truck. So it's very impressive what they've done with this transmission. Like all of the stations as you guys have been going through, we're gonna talk about what changed, why the change was made, the benefits, the service and maintenance impact, and customer values. Overall, the customer value with this transmission is going to be on durability and driver comfort, with it being smoother shifting, less fatigue on the driver, stuff like that. Durability, reliability, right, is all figured into this. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the dynamic clutch control system. You're going to see as we talk about these components why we're calling it a dynamic clutch control system, because everything's kind of working together to improve shifting. Going through here, ISO 26262 compliant. I know you guys were all worried about that on the way here, whether it was ISO 26262 compliant, right? Realistically, most of you guys probably don't know what that means. When I first heard about it, I didn't know what it meant either. But there is a standard for safety and reliability, and we adhere to those standards, right? For the safety and reliability standards set upon the ISO 262. With that is enhanced clutch durability. Talks about the Vallejo clutch, right? The Vallejo is the new supplier for the clutch that we're going to be using. That's only going to be for the G series transmission, 13-liter engine. Is not backwards compatible. Not going to be able to, you know, put it in a previous version truck or whatever, even though it's better. But what they changed on that was the friction material is a little bit different, right? It's a little bit better. The big thing is the dampening springs in the clutch itself, and the keepers are a lot better than what they used to be, right? So it's going to improve reliability on the clutch. With the clutch itself and the programming and the actuator and the valve unit all tied together, we're able to increase shifting times and stuff. And if you see, right, it only requires, 2 millimeters of movement above the slipping point to be disengaged. All of that stuff is going to go into play with how we're getting the smoother shifting. So if you look at the actuator itself, looks different. Looks a lot different than what our previous versions were. We have better dust protection with this boot, right? So it should be sealed up better to prevent contamination and debris and stuff and causing it to stick. If you look at this side, this is the vent side of it, where it's going to be venting out of it. And there's also a little bit heavier spring in there than before, right? Like I can't squeeze it like that. I have to really push it to squeeze. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Now, the valve unit itself looks a little bit different, right? The previous versions, we had the 3 bolts on the side of the transmission. You unbolt it, pretty much falls off, but you got the steel braided line and the electrical connector and stuff on there. Everything is basically built together. If you look at this side over here, it says caution, do not remove any cover. There's nothing really serviceable in here, okay? The position sensor is going to be on the valve unit itself instead of the actuator. And as of right now, this is not a replaceable sensor. So even though it's not serviceable, is a lot easier to change this. We don't have to drop the transmission. We can get it out. One of the things I heard early on was that this bearing would be serviceable. Like, and that goes to, the durability of the actuator itself, where they were saying that you could, just replace this bearing. But as of yesterday, when I looked at Impact, it's still not sold as a serviceable part. Again, I don't know what's really going to be in the field, but they were talking about having this as a serviceable component. So the actuate or the valve unit, going to the actuator, this is going to go through the side of the bell housing and basically couple up directly to the actuator itself, right? And if you see here, there's going to be like little steel tubes that go in there with O-rings or D-rings, right? Like, it's probably not, I'm talking about how they got the little hump on them where they're going to go in there. So it's just going to bolt right up and connect that way. So I know what you're thinking, right? You're like, I think it looks a lot bigger. Is that going to be able to be removed when it's in chassis? And the answer is yes. They say in any chassis, you'll be able to get this out, right? So you got the 3 bolts in here that you would unbolt, and there's actually going to be a little service cover up here with 2 bolts in it. You take that service cover out, and it's going to give an extra couple inches. And so with that being O-rings, whatever, you're going to have to pry it back a little bit. You get it pried loose, and then you'll be able to rock it out of the transmission. You know what I mean? Because when you look at it out on the truck, you're going to be like, I don't know, that spring hanger is pretty close. I think Adam's lying to me, but reality is it'll come out of there, right? Trust me. So, like I said, it's going to mount right up there. You can see there's like a couple little dowels there for the position sensor as well. But shouldn't be bad. It's definitely going to be serviceable. The other nice thing about this is with that service cover removed, with this removed, we actually have an inspection hole now, right? Where we never had a way to actually inspect anything. Now, when you remove that, you're left with a pretty big hole. So you'll be able to look at the actuator, you'll be able to look at the clutch and have an idea, of what's going on, right? So without dropping the transmission. A lot of good benefits there. Now, the brake system, they're talking about the countershaft brake. And I don't have the whole countershaft brake. I only got the housing and the piston. But they have updated this. The brake stack itself, we've added another steel disc and friction disc to it. It's going to add an additional, 26 Newton meters of braking torque, which means we're going to be able to slow that countershaft faster. It's going to help with shifting times, smoother shifting. Everything's going to be better. If you notice, previous versions of the transmissions, we fed air to the valve unit from the top cover through the housing, and there was a steel tube in the bell housing that came down to it. We don't have that anymore. The clutch valve unit is going to be feeding the air to the brake as well. This valve unit is controlling everything, right? It's controlling the clutch actuator and the brake, right? So there's a two-way valve in there that's going to feed the air and release the air for the countershaft brake. With that, they talk about less dead air volume because of, shorter supply and all of that stuff. This transmission as a whole uses less air than the previous versions. If you look at the truck itself, we don't have the small little tank that we had for the transmission, like the previous versions. The air supply is coming directly from the air production module. Now, every action has a reaction. Because this transmission uses less air than the previous versions, what we ended up having issues with, which this transmission's been used in the European market for a couple years before coming to the North American market. So they were able to do some of the real world testing with it. and they found that because this transmission's using so much less air, that the vent holes are more susceptible to plugging. It should be part of everybody's service already to be checking the vents with everything, but you definitely want to pay attention to the vents and make sure that they're clean and we're not getting stuff plugging up in there. What happens when these vents end up plugging and it can't vent anymore is we'll end up pushing the output shaft seal out and we end up with a leak. Now, through software programming in the truck to help combat that, what they're doing is when we initially turn the key on, engine off, you're going to hear a little puff of air. When you shut the truck off, you're going to hear a little puff of air. And going down the road, right, periodically, it's going to puff air through those vents to try to keep them clean. You know, like I said, it depends on the location, geographic location, right? Some things are more susceptible. You're in, you know, high salt areas, stuff like that, where corrosion's rampant anyways. You may see it more. You're in the right locations, it's not going to be as big a deal. So it all depends. Overall, like I said, a lot of good improvements through the whole clutch assembly. Now the gear control unit, this is where you can tell right away, looking at the gear control unit, that's what they're calling it, commonly referred to as the top cover. I think that's what we all know it as, the top cover. The TCU placement, everything looks a lot cleaner. If you look at the electrical connectors on there, they're actually labeled X1 and X2 on the top of the TCU now, so that can help. They have changed the connector for, you know, where you're going to hook up to it with the breakout harness to be able to communicate with it outside the truck. Obviously, you're going to have to order a new breakout harness, right, to accommodate that. But also, guys, we have to think about what we've been doing in the past to give a power supply for the transmission. It's going to have to be different, right? Because on the previous versions, right, those are 12 volts, right? You had a 12-volt power supply. Whatever you were using has been working. This is going to be 24 volts. It's going to have a 24-volt power supply, obviously, to get it to work. If I was a service manager or had my own shop or whatever, what I've been telling guys, like if it was my guys that were working on it, just to reduce the risk of mixing it up, right? Like if we hook 12 volts to this, probably not gonna cause an issue, but we could have somebody misdiagnose it. You know what I mean? Like they're like, oh, it won't communicate, must be the TCU, but they had 12 volts hooked to it, not 24, right? I've never tried it of hooking 24 volts to the 12-volt TCU and seeing what happens, but I don't know if it can handle it or not. I don't want to be the one to find out, right? Like I said, if it was me, I would mark my harnesses, right? The harness for the G series transmission, I would put 24 volts on it, right? At that where it's going to hook up to power, and put 12 volts on the other one, just to try to help the technicians. We're going to have mix and match transmissions for a long time. The 12 volts are still going to be on the road. Plus, our whole product line isn't changing today until we update our other trucks to be 24-volt trucks. They're going to have the older F version transmissions in them, right? Because they only make this in a 24-volt version. There is no 12-volt version of the G series transmission. The really cool thing about this TCU is right here. Check this out. Look at that. Oh, there's no ribbon harness. Not saying that you don't have to be careful, like removing this and stuff like that, or putting it back on. There's no ribbon harness in there to break, right? Like you get guys that get a little rough with it or whatever, unpinning it, it breaks, they get brittle, stuff like that. It's not going to break. Really nice feature they've added to that. Now, if we remove this cover right here, looks like the same gasket that's under there that is sealing it before. I don't have the gasket on there. It's actually hanging up over there. When you look at the housing itself, right, we only have one air port into it, where we had the inlet and the outlet before. So we only have the one air port now. So the fitting on top looks a little bit different. Underneath here on the housing, this whole part of the harness has been updated. It's going to be a little more friendly if we do have failures and have to replace. The solenoid themselves are not a changeable part. If you have a solenoid issue or whatever, you have to change the whole valve pack together, right? Kind of like it was on the F version, right? You can't change the individual solenoid, you got to change it all together. If you also notice these little guys right here, this little sensor, these are the position sensors, right? So the position sensors have been changed. The previous versions, the position sensors were variable reluctance sensors, and these are Hall effect sensors now. Initially, with the Hall effect sensors, they had issues in the European market with magnetic interference. So high EMI zones would basically disable this transmission because these are Hall effect sensors. What they did to fix that problem is inside the TCU, it's built with a sensor that detects EMI, right? So if there's too much EMI, it'll put this transmission into an open loop operation and it'll just go through default shifting and you'll still be able to move the truck. The only sensors that are on the wet side of the cover are our speed sensors for our main shaft and counter shaft speed. Those sensors are the only ones that are here on the wet side. If we look at the control housing itself, right, on this side of it, it does look different, right? Like it's not as bulky casted and stuff like that. They have made this cover more serviceable. The other previous versions of the transmission, they're always kind of serviceable. You could find the parts, but not necessarily in impact, right? You wouldn't find the parts in impact. With these, if you go to the parts breakdown on the cover and impact, you will find everything, right? You will find the detent springs, balls, the seals for the pistons. You'll be able to get all the parts to rebuild the top cover. The idea too, with this being like cleaner and looking, it'll be easier to diagnose and see if, you know, the detents are working and everything's there. Plus it's going to help with even, you know, setting the forks in the right place for putting the control housing back on, right? Before you're kind of feeling it, you can actually see the detent notches in there and stuff. So if you notice the range rod here where we're going to go hook up to the range for setting, this is something that's not cut all the way around anymore. You're going to want to pay attention to the position of that going in there. And there's a little location dot on it that locates to keep it in the square spot. But this shift fork right here, can anybody tell me what this shift fork is? The split, right? The high-low split. And if you know how this transmission operates, the high-low split is the one that's going to move every single shift, right? Goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth all day long, right? And in our previous versions, you know, we had the piston and we were basically like slamming it back and forth. With this style, what they did, they updated this and this is going to rock, right? So it's on a rocker. Still the air piston moving it, right? But it's going to rock it back and forth. So to slamming it is going to have a little more finesse to it, right? It's going to be a little cleaner. So between the rocking shift fork, the clutch system, the counter shaft brake, that's how we're getting the smoother shifting, right? You put it all together with the right, you know, parameter setting and stuff like that. That's how it shifts seamlessly, right? A lot better feeling for this transmission. Also, if you see this little point right here, right? You see that little triangle? What this is for is the crawler interlock, right? So you see they updated the crawler interlock and that's going to feed right there in that little notch. The previous versions, we had the interlock on the side of the fork. It was like a little tab. It worked fine and stuff, but with this design, this is going to be rocking, so they had to change the design anyways. The previous versions, we actually made two different forks, right? There was a fork for crawler transmissions, and there was one for non-crawler transmissions. Not that it was like a real common thing to happen all the time, but you could accidentally put the wrong fork in the wrong transmission, right? Didn't seem to care if you put a crawler fork in a non-crawler transmission, but if you put a non-crawler fork in a crawler transmission, obviously things weren't going to work right because I had no interlock. But from a manufacturing standpoint, it makes sense that we're just going to manufacture one fork. This is going to be the same fork whether it's a crawler or a non-crawler transmission, right? So you don't have to worry about, getting the wrong fork and stuff like that, and we're only manufacturing one fork. As far as this valve unit for the crawler, they did do some updates to it. Like, even if I took it apart, you can't really see, but it's supposed to have better valves, better position sensor, and stuff like that in there. But it's been updated to be better. The oil level sensor. The oil level sensor, you can see it here mounted on the side of the case. This is going to be on the right side of the transmission. It's going to be located close to the sight glasses, right? Right around the sight glass, you see that's what those holes are. So the sight glasses are still going to be in the transmission, but we've added a level sensor. Anyhow, can you see from there, how many terminals does this have? 4, right? Can anybody guess what those 4 wires would be used for? Level and temp. That would be cool. We're not monitoring temp with the level sensor at this time. From my understanding, it has a capability, but we don't utilize that yet. We're still going to use the temp sensor here, from the splash. The 4 wires are power, ground, and data link is the other 2, right? Yeah, because why not, right? So the data link is going to be obviously on the powertrain subnet, right? It's going to connect to the powertrain subnet. And like, if you think about it, it makes sense, okay? Because we're not monitoring level going down the road, right? The only time that we're monitoring the level in the transmission is initial key on, engine off. We got to get the message there pretty fast. So it makes sense that it is data link. Plus, in the future, right, if we want to add more things, right, if, whatever the capabilities of this sensor are, probably be able to do it. Initial key on, engine off, we're going to take a reading, and it has to be on level ground, flat ground, okay? Because, again, it makes sense. If we're on an incline, it's not going to be accurate, right? Our inclination sensor that's in the TCU not only is doing this way, it's also measuring yaw as well, right? So no matter what direction of unlevelness, it's going to pick it up, right? Because there's added driving features and stuff that go along with this, right? It's not specifically for the level sensor, but we'll utilize the same thing and look at it. Okay, you're on a side incline, not going to take a reading, right? And from the numbers that I've seen, the 6% reading on the inclination sensor is a cutoff point, right? So it can be on a little bit of a grade and it's still going to take it. If it's over that 6%, you're not going to get a reading. So if you have a customer, right, that calls up and they're, I bought this truck and, I'm looking for the oil level and it never reads, all right? I never get a reading. And the first question you should ask is, well, where do you park the truck? You know what I mean? Like, if they're driving it home every night and they live on a mountain, and it's always on an incline, they're never going to get a reading, right? So, tell them, find a flat spot, see if it works, go from there. The other thing is the level sensor, what the driver's going to see on their display if they were checking it, is a reading that basically goes from 0 to 100, right? So there's going to be numbers there. It's not just okay, not okay. And it's going to go 0 to 100. If you were hooking up Tech Tool, whatever, like, the TCU is not reading it as 100. We actually read it starts at 90, okay? So 90 is 100, right? If that makes sense. And our actual range, right, that it's still going to be good is from 90 to 15%, right? That's a lot of numbers. Like 90 to 15 is a lot of numbers. But What that's actually equating to in the transmission for fluid level is from the top of the sight glass to the bottom of the sight glass, right? So if you think about it, if a driver is monitoring that and they're seeing 100, right? Okay, so let's say it goes from 100 to 50. Like in their mind, it should be like, hey, I'm losing fluid somewhere. I should probably get that checked out. Again, it's still going to be in a good place, right? But it should be able to bring in service earlier before something bad happens. Now, let's say they don't check it, right? Because they don't never read the owner's manual, don't push buttons. They don't even know where it's displayed. If they get to that 15% mark, it's going to throw a yellow warning up on the dash, and it's going to say, hey, check the transmission fluid. Okay. Now, at this point, it's going to happen every time they start truck, right? If they keep ignoring it, we're going to have a logged fault code for it. If they keep ignoring it and it gets to 0, right, that's where it's going to throw a red one up like, hey, there's no transmission fluid. You got to bring it in. Okay. And if they keep ignoring it and burn it up, right, now at least you can verify, well, it's been a slow leak, right? It's been a slow leak. Probably should have got it fixed a while ago. Probably not going to cover it under warranty, right? Without this monitoring live going down the road, which would be impossible, if there was like a catastrophic failure going down the road where, a cooler line got ripped off for whatever reason, it dumped all the fluid out, it's going to burn the transmission up and they're not going to know. But we're not going to have a month of fault codes logged, right? You'll be able to see whether it was instantaneous or a progressive leak that caused the issue. So a lot of good benefits, right, to it. And like I said, with this starting, right, who knows what we're going to have in the future, right? We have a starting point, we can build on it, keep increasing what it does. So at no point will this derate the truck or shut the truck down. Right? They can run it completely out of oil. All they're getting is the red light, okay, which should be enough, but you never know. All right, so go back to the actuator. One thing, like I said, it's been updated for the actuator. And in our previous versions, if you were installing the transmission, right, you always had to set the actuator back. And typically, right, you had to remove the service plug on the side of the valve unit. And you would either, push it in, put the plug back in, or some people, like there was a procedure where you could just leave the plug out and install a transmission, right? Either way was acceptable. We don't have a service plug anymore. So it is wrote that like there's 2 methods for doing this. One is the preferred way, one is the way to do it if you don't have access to Tech Tool or something like that. If you don't have access to Tech Tool, the way is going to be to have the valve unit removed completely, and then you have to install it once the transmission's up in the truck. If you leave this loose, there's that spring's going to fight you. You know what I mean? If you leave that off there, it's going to want to keep pushing back, and you may or may not be able to get it seated without having to draw it in. So obviously that's not the preferred way. If you did have like the service plugs and you push this back and put it in there, it would hold to do it. Again, the preferred way, the way that makes the most sense to me is using Tech Tool and the tests that they have to run it, right? So they have a new test for installation and actually removal of the transmission, right? So the test is, I don't remember the exact number in Tech Tool of what it is, but it's solenoid activation for transmission removal and install. And basically you run it and it sets the actuator back and locks it in, okay? And the idea is for removal, if you set it up before you remove the transmission, this isn't going to push the transmission back, right? Like if you If you don't set it, it could happen to where you take the bolts out and the transmission pops back on you. So it's a good idea to do it that way. The But definitely on installation, right? You would want to run that test, set this actuator back. You're going to have to push it back because there's going to be nothing else pushing it. But you would run the test. It's going to activate the valve. You're going to push it back, and then it'll hold so you can install the transmission without it pushing back. In the future, right, when Workshop Toolbox is fully operational and stuff, that test is going to be like one of the little apps in there. And from everything that I've used in Workshop Toolbox so far, everything is a lot quicker, right? So I'm not going to make promises again that I can't keep and say that it's going to be only a couple minutes, but keep an open mind about it. If Workshop Toolbox has it and it's a lot quicker, it may be the way to then it may be the way to do it. You know, right now this might be a two-person job. You know what I mean? One guy to hold it, one guy to get it in there as well. So again, like I never say never because technicians are always gonna find a way. It's about time and money and you know getting things to work. So I want to say, oh, you can't do it that way, but if you could do it that way and it's good, my selling point on it for guys too is from a technician standpoint, like um, if running the test and putting it in there, I'm also assuring that I didn't cut an O-ring, everything's sealed and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Um, Things happen, right? Like I've definitely had my fair share of mistakes. So like like I said, it gives me a peace of mind as a technician that I have everything installed right and I don't have to mess with it. So um and even at that, right, like um depending on how cruddy that transmission was, I may not want to take those bolts out anyways. But you know what I mean? It was like a cement truck or something and but um that's it all depends on the application and what you're working on. All right. So like I don't have the whole clutch housing and stuff to show you, obviously, otherwise I would have. But the other thing that they have updated on the control housing is they moved the service tag from the 12 o'clock position to the 9 o'clock position. Right. So it's going to be easier to see. Right. Like we've always wanted it in the North American market. The European side of things are like, I don't see the problem, right? Because everything's a cab over, right? We finally got what we've been asking for to get it to be moved, and the 9 o'clock position's there. Here's the thing, right? You'll be able to get the part number, serial number, and stuff like that off the transmission, off the tag, but it's not going to say ATO 2612G. Okay. They changed the nomenclature a little bit, and the variants. What you would see it is going to say TRAG dash G, right? So trag G. And if you see it labeled anywhere, like in the door jamb, it'll still say ATO 2612, but you won't see a G or an F or anything like that. Actually, even the TRAG, it might not say G behind it. It might be just TRAG right now. Like I said, if you see ATO 2612 and there's no F or anything behind, it's a G. Okay. In the future, right? Like they're going to keep developing transmissions. So I'm sure there's going to be a HIJKL and so on and so forth. How they're going to identify those is your guess as good as mine. Um, but as of right now, I think if you bring it up in impact as well, like, how you look at the documents and you could always identify, what I mean, like the certain years by it being a D or an F or whatever. Um, it's just going to say TRAG on it.